Good evening and welcome to Tales of Cape Cod on this rainy evening. I want to start my introductory comments. My name is Gene Quill. I'm a past president of the organization. I want to start my introductory comments by thanking you for your support throughout the year and over the past few years. Your support is essential for us to maintain the quality of our programming, for us to maintain and restore this building, for us to continue the oral history work that we have done for over 50 years, and all of the other activities that we engage in. Before I introduce this evening's program, there are three announcements I would like to make. First, our annual meeting is scheduled for November the 13th. This is a Monday evening. Please mark your calendars. We will come out with an announcement for the program in the coming weeks. Second, we have much to look forward to in the coming year. 2024 will be the 250th anniversary of the Body of the People protest, which took place on this site as well as at selected courthouses across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. These protests marked the beginning of the American Revolution. They predated the battles of Lexington and Concord by more than 6 months. In the words of John Adams, the revolution began before the war. The revolution was in the minds and the hearts of the people. Ann Kennedy and our program committee are busy putting together a lineup of speakers for next year. If you have suggestions for speakers or topics, please let us know. Third, before the start of our next season, which is May of next year, we will complete the third restoration project of this building in the past 5 years. This project will involve regrading the front lawn, redesigning, resetting the brick sidewalks, rebuilding the south porch, which is the bell tower porch on the building, placing a mechanical lift beside the south porch, and removing the mechanical lift over here on the west porch, and regrading and enlarging the parking space to be a legitimate handicapped parking space. The objective of this project is to improve the accessibility of the building. Under different circumstances, I would love to tell you more about this construction project, but I know you didn't come here to hear me talk this evening. Our program this evening is a live chat interview conversation with David Gergen. This program is sponsored by Lee and Jamie Hunsaker. Thank you. David Gergen is a political commentator and former presidential advisor who served during the administrations of 4 U.S. presidents, President Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton. He has been a senior political analyst for CNN and a professor of public service. He is the founding director of the Center for Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School and is a former editor-at-large of U.S. News and World Report. David has been a member of the election coverage teams that have won 2 Peabody Awards, first in 1988 and 20 years later in 2008. David graduated with honors from Yale University and Harvard Law School and has been awarded 27 honorary degrees. He has taught at Duke University and Harvard University and has authored 2 books, Eyewitness to Power and Hearts Touched with Fire. David and his wife Ann live in Cambridge and Barnstable Village. Our moderator this evening is Steve Junker. Steve is the managing editor of news at WCAI, our local NPR station. Steve joined CAI in 2007. His reporting has been recognized with awards from the Associated Press and the Edward R. Murrow Awards. He hosts a live weekly program, the Local News Roundup, and produces a weekly seasonal report on Cape Cod fishing. David is a writer, a fisherman, an occasional boat builder, a recovering musician, a longtime chicken rancher, and a fellow beekeeper. He lives in Woods Hole with his wife and 2 children. Please join me in welcoming David Gergen and Steve Junker.
Thank you, Gene. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight on this stormy night and for joining us for this conversation with David. It's wonderful to be here with you. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
We are here in part to talk about your book, Hearts Touched with Fire, How Great Leaders Are Made. But we're also here to enjoy some of the experience that you've had and to tease that out in conversation, and we hope that our conversation will range widely this evening. And we're hoping that we're going to ask some questions and have some conversation here, and then we will leave some time for questions from the audience too, so that we can all participate. I had a little introduction scripted out, but Gene did such a good job there that we'll gather that everybody kind of knows in part why we're here. And your book is about leadership. And I also had a bunch of questions scribbled to set up this conversation, but then I thought maybe we could jump in a little bit in the middle, and that it might help set the stakes for our conversation. And I'm thinking of something that you said to me earlier today. You said that you felt like the country is facing a leadership crisis, and a large part of this is generational. And that rang such a bell with me. I think a lot of times people are talking partisan, but you're talking generational in terms of what a leadership crisis looks like. And I'm wondering if you could just describe for us a little bit what you see around that.
Sure. Well, first of all, Steve, I appreciate you being here. And Gene has become a friend during our time here at Barnstable, working on various projects together. So that's been a great fun for my wife and I. And my wife of 53 years is upstairs. Like you, we came through that torrential rain. And I kept on thinking, there's always been this hardiness strain among New Englanders. By definition, people in New England are just hardy, and we're proving it again tonight. The question is, are we also crazy? Who the hell, risks pneumonia to come out and talk to someone black? It's just like, okay. Well, in any event, I'm delighted to be here. It's been a privilege for us to get a second home here in Barnstable. We've been treated really well. But most of all, it's been really good for our family, and it's just been a delight. We just saw one of my older brothers off this afternoon into the rain. Now, the question is, where are we as a society with leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Where does this begin? Well, I think that the mistakes that have been made, the crises we faced, they're all pretty obvious to us. People have been living with these questions now for a long time. I think the real question is, where are we heading? It's not just about the past. We spend too much time litigating the past and not enough time trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do about it? Where are we going to go from here? And we need to do that more than we do. Did I say something? Yeah. So, and it's my job. I had the privilege of working with 4 presidents on both sides of the aisle, and with each person, with each man, there were some qualities that were good, but it's not been the best string of presidents we've had. In some ways, I tell people, it wasn't that glamorous what I did. I got into politics with Watergate, and I got out of politics with Whitewater. So it's been one heck of a ride coming through that. But I must tell you that first and foremost, I believe that, and my experience has been, that change is important in personnel. And that just as corporations require their CEOs to step down after 65 or 70 or what have you, I think it's really important. Thank you. I think you just turned something else. I think it's really important that our public leaders have clarity of mind. They're strong physically. They're not at great risk. They're not so cautious or incautious as they might be. They can. In today's world, it's particularly important to be adaptive because the world is changing so quickly. You need to be able to understand it and figure it out. And what we look to leadership for is education, is to educate others about the needs of the group. And we've had a series of presidents who've been unable to do that very well, and sort of left us in the lurch. My own feeling right now, I said some time ago, some months ago, I thought for the country's sake, I like the individuals involved, especially, I've known Joe Biden a long, long time, and I think he's a fine man. I don't know Donald Trump. I've met him once. I took a class of students into we were in New York, and a student said they really wanted to meet Donald Trump. He was a private citizen at that point. And I called and said, can I bring 25 students in? And they said yes. We went in there in this conference room, and he was actually quite polite. Around the room, I noticed there were about 25 photographs hanging in one sort or another. Every single photograph contained a picture of Donald Trump. And it was sort of like, light bulb went off on that one. But I think it's time to pass the torch, begin passing the torch in a much more serious way to the next generation. Those of us who are older have had our time in the sandbox, and at some point you've got to be willing to say, give over the reins to people who are fresh. They have fresh insights. They're not complacent. They don't have to defend the several things that have been going on. They can focus on the here and now and the future instead of relitigating the past. I remember when Gerry Ford pardoned Nixon, he did that because he couldn't govern until he got rid of the whole Nixon set of arguments. Otherwise, his governance was impossible. Well, it's becoming increasingly difficult in this country to govern well, especially with the advent of social programs, but also just generally speaking, there's been I think the baby boom generation of which I'm a part, I think we've sort of exhausted ourselves, and it's time to move over. Now, what that doesn't mean it's time to check out. What it means is we ought to be working with the next generation to help them prepare to do good things for us, for the country and for the world. And that preparation, I think, is a very, very strong argument. I happen to be a big believer in national service, and that is the idea of encouraging every young person between the ages of 18 and 24 to spend at least 1 year giving back to the country in some fashion. Working for a nonprofit, working in a hospital, working in a variety of different things you can do, but that you give back in the spirit of learning how to work with others, learning the discipline of having a job, very importantly, understanding that we all, as the saying goes, we all came on different boats, but now we're all in the same ship together. And that's in effect where we are. That's the beginnings of our conversation. Steve, let you take it from there.
Well, I'm curious. It raises a couple of questions. I think back to, you spoke about President Clinton, and he was such a young president when he came in. And there was a time when it seemed like, excuse me for the feedback, that the passing of the torch happened as a natural progression. And we're not seeing that now, and I'm wondering if there's something that you identify as being part of the impediment.
I think people are clinging to the curtains. Power, this has become about power, not about purpose. And at a time we need people to be focused on what do we need to do as a country. We're spending way too much time worried about, did he say or that she say something or that happened 3 years ago or 5 years ago. Churchill said, if we simply have a debate between the here and now and the past, we will lose the future. We will lose the future. And I think that's a sober thought, but I think it's true.
What stands in the way of fostering better leaders?
I think, this may be a argument too far, but if you go through American history, what's striking is it's one of our nastiest periods in U.S. history came late into the 19th century, 1880s, 1890s, all the way up to the turn of the century in McKinley and TR. And one of the reasons that was such a bloody, awful period was that the two parties were essentially equal in strength, and they were playing against each other. To get little gains, they would do a big thing to get little gains, because just a few votes here, a few votes there decided things. Historically, what political scientists will say is, historically there has been one dominant party and one subservient party. There's been like the sun and the moon. But when you have this situation in which it's dog eat dog and it's flooded in the streets, people get angry with each other, they polarize, and I think we're going through another period like that now. We got the two period, the conservatives and the liberals are split, pretty much down the middle, whether it's Democrat or Republican, the splits are just obvious, and they become extremely damaging. If we're not careful, we're going to leave behind so much baggage and so much animosity that the next generation won't be able to go. And that's why I think we have some moral obligation to turn over the country that at least is as good as what the country we inherited. It seems to me if we can't do that, we've been failures as a generation.
That's a big obligation. I think about my children and think about so many children in this country coming up and feeling a little disenfranchised because it feels like all the power is held some other place.
I agree. Now, that's not to say that the young generation coming may not be able to adjust to it. I think there are individuals coming up in the earlier generations who are quite promising. And you will hear me probably at least twice, if I ever get the floor on this, to extol the promise of a fellow young man named Wes Moore. How many of you ever heard of Wes Moore? A handful. Wes Moore is a young African-American who was born on the wrong side of the tracks. Single mom, father disappeared early. He was in the streets a lot. He got in trouble with the police a lot. He was arrested. He was handcuffed by the age of 12. He was charged with stealing cars, and it looked like his life was going to go to hell. It was just sort of crumbling in front of him. His mother didn't know what to do, and so she, as a last-minute gesture, somehow assembled the funds or the help or whatever to send him to a military academy. Wes went off to a place called the Valley Forge Military Academy. I didn't know much about that academy before. Anyway, he went there and he rebelled, but eventually they turned him around, and he became very disciplined. He went through the drills and the discipline of signing up for the military, and that really squared him away. And from that, he got into Johns Hopkins as an undergraduate, and in Johns Hopkins he got a Rhodes Scholarship. That went along with the White House Fellowship he got a few years later. It went along with the fact that for 8 or 9 years he ran something called the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City, which is the largest anti-poverty organization in the country. He did all those things, then he decided to run for office. He was encouraged to run for office, and he just ran a few months ago. And he had never run for anything important in his life. He pulled it out. He won it by 20 points in the Maryland Democratic primary. Then he went ahead and beat the Republican in the general election by 20 points. And he's now off and running. And Wes, let me say one more thing about his credentials. He did all the things we love in liberals, right? But he also did something very important that's important to conservatives, and that he volunteered for the 82nd Airborne. And he parachuted into Afghanistan and Iraq. This is a guy who put his life on the line, quite literally, for the country. Now, since he's been elected, he had 2 objectives in his inaugural. One is to deal with childhood poverty, and the other is national service. What he wants to do is set up a system that says if you graduate from a public high school in the state of Maryland, you will have an option, if you wish to choose it, you will have an option to work for a year for a nonprofit or in the government we're doing something that's giving back. If you do that, if you give that year back, we're going to reduce your debt a lot. You're going to be able to earn your way along, and it's going to be a lot like the old Civilian Conservation Corps. The CCC was something started by Franklin Roosevelt back in the first few months of his administration. He was inaugurated in March of '33. In April, he called for the creation of a Civilian Conservation Corps. By that summer, there were 250,000 young men in the woods and forests of this country, cleaning things up, restoring the forest, earning a living, making $1 a day, sending money back home, and they had jobs. They had jobs, and they had the pride that comes with having a job. And it made a big, big difference for them. It was the most popular program of the New Deal, and you did huge good things for the spirit of the country, the sense that we all belong in this together. And that's where Wes he's got a tough road to hoe. It's very, very hard to make change. But he's the kind of person we're starting to see emerge. And there are others. You know, take the woman who's running the state of Michigan, Whitmer, or take the woman who was here in the governor of Rhode Island, who's now the Commerce Secretary. We've had some really, really good people come through. We just haven't had enough, and we haven't had enough training for them. We haven't prepared them for what's coming, which is a period of enormous volatility, chaos, and change.
I've heard you mention a couple of times now public service as
Yep.
a component
Yep.
of what it means to become a leader. Can you talk a little bit about why you feel so strongly about public service?
Well, I feel strongly about public service because I've seen it work, you know, and make change. I was a native of North Carolina, and during the 60s, during the civil rights period, I worked for a governor we had named Terry Sanford, who was our Jack Kennedy. He was very charismatic, you know, smart, interesting, Terry set up a good neighbor council, or good neighbor councils all around the state of North Carolina. And the Good Neighbor Council brought together the top leadership of the white community and the top leadership of the black community to focus on education and jobs, and to keep the peace. Keep the peace. It was, you know, it was designed purposefully. So that was the time of Schwerner and those three guys got killed in Mississippi. You'll remember that. It's a tough go. But anyway, when you have, as we've had, I'm sorry. Let's keep our focus here. When we gone through his, I'm sorry.
May I adjust your mic? They can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, yes, please. I'm sorry we didn't adjust it earlier.
Okay, I'll just move it closer to you.
Okay.
You can keep talking.
If it gets any closer, I'll swallow it. You sure you want to do this?
All right, right here.
Whoa! Thank you. Thanks very much. So anyway, I hope that you can hear more clearly. You still can't hear? Is that better? Okay, I'll talk louder. Well, it's pretty loud. Okay. I feel like I'm shouting in the theater, but anyway. This North Carolina Good Neighbor Council, Terry gave me a chance to go work for it one summer as an intern while I was late in my college life. And I was the man who was running the Good Neighbor Council, the fellow who was sort of the chair of it, had once been a staunch segregationist, but he flipped. He saw the light, came over and became an ardent supporter of integration. But when I got started working with him, he had no staff. He had a secretary, and that was it. I became his policy person, his press person, his driver, almost anything you can name. Yes, I did it. But I want to tell you something. I spent 3 or 4 summers doing this and this sort of thing. It was the most fulfilling time I've had in public service. I've worked for the White House for 4 presidents. It's been a privilege to do that. But there was nothing that replaced the sense I had we're doing something real. I can find it and see it in people's lives. You know, we can see it in our community as tearing itself apart. And it was a very rewarding sense of this is a good thing for us to be doing. And I spent 3 years in the Navy. I think the Navy was very glad to see the back of me. I didn't know the difference between a nut and a bolt, still don't. I was their damage control officer on a couple of ships. Damage control was a great thing, great preparation for working in the White House. But other than that, so there we are. But I came out of that, Steve, thinking, I went to work for a law firm for a while. I'd gone to law school. And I worked for a firm in New York, and then I went off in the Navy and came back. It just didn't sing to me. It just didn't sing to me. I once took some other students, in to see Barack Obama. Barack was newly elected. He was a member of the Senate, fresh member of the Senate. And one of the students said, Senator Obama, here's where I'd like you to get your comment, your counsel on the career trajectory I'm on and where I'm going to be in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years. Here's what I plan to do every 5 years. And Obama said, hold on. That is not the way to form your future. The way to form your future is to find your calling, to find your passion. Pursue your passion. And then the jobs will follow you. But you have to pay your dues. You've got to learn to run things yourself. And if you do that, we'll give you the opportunity, but you've got to learn yourself. And the best place you can learn is in the arena. And I went in the Navy, but it was an important part of my learning to be up in the top deck, having this multi-millionaire vehicle to drive around. It was sobering, but it still wasn't as interesting as what it did in the civil rights area. And I'm proud of that. I had some presidents that I would look back and tell you, listen, they were good people, they meant well, but it didn't quite work out what we thought it would. There's still much good about them, but we're not addressing and solving the nation's problems. They get bigger and more, they hit us harder, and we've got to start calming down and work on this together.
Your long career has given you this unique opportunity to spend time with different leaders and to observe the different styles that people bring to leadership. I think for a lot of people, leadership is kind of an abstract idea, or maybe it's like a cartoon picture of somebody running ahead with a flag saying, follow me. Yeah. What should we be thinking about when we think about leadership, and what are some of the qualities that you think these disparate people all share?
People have different views about what the most important quality is of a leader, and I think that's a legitimate argument. Churchill believed the most important element was courage. David McCullough, who happened to be a friend from years past, before he died, he argued after his book on Harry Truman and some of his other writings, the most important quality of a leader is not courage, it's character. And are you trustworthy? We've had a massive loss of trust in our institutions ever since Watergate and Whitewater and Vietnam War in particular. We've lost belief in government, belief in public leadership. When you had a FDR and then a Truman and then an Eisenhower, then a Kennedy, if you have 4 in a row like that, you're doing darn well, right? As a community. We haven't been able to maintain that kind of streak, and and I think we're paying a terrible price for it. But I think you should look for things in a leader that are basically what you would want and a member of your family. Warren Bennis, who was a guru of leadership and a dear friend of long standing, he's no longer with us. He used to argue with me that you really had to see the process of becoming a leader very similar to the process of becoming an adult. That you have to sort of learn how to put things together for yourself and to have a set of values and moral values that matter. I'm really pleased that there's a friend named Bill George, if you don't know him, you should, who's written about True North. And that is the idea that everyone should have an anchor in life, a set of a compass about where you're trying to go, a set of values that guide you moving in that direction. And Bill lives in, he was a CEO for a long time, then he taught at Harvard Business School. Now he's opened a course at Duke University. They're going to have every freshman go through a program, a seminar on True North, on how you can find it. And the aim at Duke is, before you leave, every single student will spend a few weeks in that kind of seminar. And that, I think, is wise. That recognizes this is serious stuff. We have to take it seriously. And we're going to have better people, we'll have better leaders as a result.
Can you talk just a little bit more about teaching leadership? I think to a lot of people that seems almost like a funny idea that you would teach somebody to be a leader.
Well, it's a funny idea to raise a child, too, in that sense.
Yeah. It starts differently, but yeah.
I'm not sure either. Look, I think that we used to have, the Justice Brennan used to say about pornography, you know it when you see it. And that's true of leadership. You can't write a thesis about it. You can't be scientific about leadership. It's more art than science. And you have to be sort of aware of that. And you have to have other qualities beyond the ones like character and courage. I think you have to have a sense of humor. My sense is that humor goes a long way towards softening things up, getting people to listen to each other. And the White House where we had the most fun in that regard, it was surprising, was Ronald Reagan. He enjoyed being president. He didn't have to be president. He wasn't driven the way Nixon was. He wasn't driven the way Trump is. He wasn't driven the way LBJ was. Reagan sort of had come to grips with who he was. He thought he was a movie actor. He loved being a movie actor. And that was really important to him. But I'll just tell you, I have a bunch of Reagan stories. I'll just give you a sense of what life was like in that administration. We had a chief of staff named Jim Baker. In my judgment, the best chief of staff in American history. And he was Reagan's chief of staff. And Baker was also very ethical about things. So there was a rule in those days, and I think it's still there, that people are going to probably send you gifts when you're working in the White House. You're a staff person. Suddenly something appears at the door. It's a package, and if you can keep it if you can drink it in one sitting. Otherwise, you're not expected to keep it. Well, so Baker had his office, and something came in one morning for Baker, and it was a great big portrait somebody on the outside had painted of him. It was really well done, but it was about this big round like that. And so Baker didn't see it. He didn't know it'd come in. So I got Mike Deaver, and we said, let's grab that painting, and we put it in a closet in the West Wing, and waited our time. And it came Reagan's birthday. And Reagan was going off with Nancy to Camp David. And whenever he went up to Camp David like that, just before he left the grounds, and when he went on the helicopter, he would stand and talk to like 3 or 4 members of the staff, have a conversation. And I happened to be in those conversations periodically. So we got Mike Deaver and I got this painting, and we wrapped it in birthday paper. And they got help wrapped up, and then had it. And when Reagan went down to the diplomatic room to leave, he was getting ready to leave, Deaver and I came up from behind and said, Mr. President, we're sorry we're a little late, but Jim has this gift he wanted to give to you that's like really, really important. Would you mind staying just for a few more minutes, because Jim would really appreciate it. The baker's standing right there. So Reagan says, oh, I'd be glad to do it. So he opened it up, and there's this portrait of his chief of staff. Can you imagine? Baker was mad as hell. So we had fun those days too. There were some. You know, if you're going to cry, if it was not so sad, you cry. But there we are. Keep going.
There must have been a lot of people with big personalities.
Big personality.
Yes.
Yeah. Vying
for a say in what's going to happen in those rooms. And And I'm curious to get your sense of when difficult decisions happen, how do they happen in a room like that when you got a number of different people with points of view? And is that the leader's point that has to make the decision? Is it somebody who's...
It frequently is the leader's. It's his prerogative. He was, George H.W. Bush would often, when he got into an argument with his chief of staff, and eventually became annoyed with his chief of staff, he would take his finger and tap the chief of staff in the chest and said, "If you're so damn smart, why aren't you president?" And that seemed to, everything settled down after that. Pretty soon the chief of staff changed, but nonetheless, there was that quality. So you do have, every president has, just like most of us in life. I was with Fareed Zakaria last week. We did an event together, and Fareed lives in, I don't know if you know Fareed, but he's on TV. He's terrific. He's on CNN. He's their international guy, just terrific. But any event, he was when he was a young boy growing up, he wanted to go to an American college or university, and it came down to two universities. He was choosing between Princeton and Yale. So he decided, he couldn't decide. So he said, "I'll flip a coin." So he flipped a coin and came up Princeton. Zakaria looked around and said, "Let's try 3 out of 5.
I'm still curious about some of these ideas of leadership that you outline in your book, and
Sure.
and you talk about leaders on this, and you've lived with leadership in a grand scale. But I think about our communities,
Yep.
and on the community level, what leadership can look like, or how we can foster local leadership, especially as communities on Cape Cod face a lot of difficult decisions.
I agree. Look, when I first went to Washington back in the late 60s, right? Those kind of questions were very high up on the totem pole. But we've changed since then, and it's been the focus on doing things at a national level has broken down because we have so much polarization. So I tell young people today, I used to tell them, if you want to get started in public life, go work in Washington. It's a good place. You'll learn a lot. Powerful people. You'll learn how the etiquette and things like that you need to know. But I've increasingly found if you send people to Washington, unless they have a special job, they have a hard time getting things done, and it's discouraging to them. It's frustrating that you're in there. It just takes time to get things done, and people yell and scream. It's a little bit like a university. Universities have become more and more bureaucratic and staff-driven. And you don't have the sort of large thinking that we once did. The university president used to teach ethics courses, for example. Today we teach how do you raise money, and issues like that. So I don't think there's a perfect solution.
I was interested looking at the book, Hearts Touched by Fire, about how you have a context for talking about leadership, going back into American political history, and then it's also a how-to manual. It really is a very practical guide, and you kind of start off with speaking to young people on that path about learning to master themselves and understand themselves, and then also how to apply that in a context in which you're apprenticing to leadership.
Yeah, well, apprenticing is a good way to look at it. Mentoring, apprenticing is something I think we owe the next generation. I think that the best training for someone who's young is to have role models and people you can emulate, and you sort of think it through, and then you don't want to be that role model, but you want to have some of the values of the role model. And we need to encourage more people to serve in that capacity. Now, to go to your other part of this question, look, I think one of the most productive places you can look these days is in state and local government, and the nonprofit field too. But that's where real change is able to make it. And I think there's some value in the idea that you try out ideas at the state and local level first, and then if they seem to work, and from an economic standpoint, for example, social ethics or social mobilization. If they seem to work, then you try to build them up. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail. We're looking at right now, I've just stepped in from the professorship at Kennedy School, but we're looking at the idea of creating summer fellowships or summer internships for people to go, young people, take a top flight individual coming out of with a master's degree program in public policy. Find the best one you can find around and help them find a really good boss, so that you've got sort of a really strong player and a really good boss, and let them work together for 8 or 10 weeks, pay their expenses, and if they're good at what they do, if the young person's good, then you hire them. And if they're not good, well, then they move on, or if it's not a good fit. But the idea is to get some high-powered people like the Westmores of the world. We don't need just one Westmore, we need 25 Westmore. You know, we need a whole cadre of people, and I think we can do that if we keep trying to inspire them. But we've also got to be, you know, those of us in the older generation, you know, have to, I think in the way you are in the world, the way you are, you know, that makes a big difference. People watch. If you're working in government, people watch you. You don't know they're doing it, but they do watch you. And they take lessons from it. Or they decide, you know, this person's up for it, or that person's not up for it. I mean, the difference is, Jack Kennedy was one kind of leader, Bobby Kennedy was a different kind of leader, and Bobby in some ways was more interesting than Jack. You know, but that's again a judgment call about style and about values.
As somebody who works in media and journalism, I think about how that interaction with leadership has really changed.
Yeah.
When you think about Jack Kennedy and the things he was doing in his private life and how that was not reported, and you think about how that would never happen now. And there's a different, more radical transparency, it feels like, when it comes to people poking into the lives and the conversations that happen around leaders and leadership and the choices that they've made. And I wonder if that makes it harder to be a leader now, and if that turns people off.
It's much harder to be a leader these days than it was. It's easier to grab leadership, you know, because we open up, anybody can be on the internet, and like an AOC can come out of nowhere, you know, as a barmaid and suddenly be a national figure. That wouldn't have happened in the old days because the internet opened that up. AOC made extremely clever use of it and served her well, and she got what she was looking for. So it was easy to get there. It was pretty easy for her to get there. It's been much harder for her to govern. And she's frustrated by when people are frustrated with her. So it's harder to govern, and it's really easy to go down because there are always people out there gunning for you. I mean, it is a fact of life that there is very, very little harmony and friendships. Leaders in the past had more of that. The first time in our to go to Santa Barbara when George was running for presidency for the first time, and when I flew up to Maine and was in the airport looking around, I knew a car would be out there on the driveway. I was looking around for the driver, and I got summoned to the pickup spot, and there was George Bush. He driven 50 miles to pick me up. We spent the weekend together. He had another person in the house at that time for the weekend. It was a Democratic mayor of Congress. They were good friends. They worked across the aisle. What who they were, and they were. You just don't see that kind of acceptance or embrace. I'll give you another brief story. I'll try to keep it. Reagan and Tip O'Neill. Reagan, big, staunch conservative, most conservative person since the 1920s in that office. Tip O'Neill, very liberal person, one of the most liberal people since FDR. And so they had a rule that they could bang each other over the head anytime they wanted up until 5 o'clock in the day. And at 5 o'clock they had to put their differences down, and that's when you shared a glass. You had old yarns and old Irish stories, you laughed a lot, and you got to know each other. and you begin to trust each other. Not that you love each other, you didn't change your values, it changed how you went about getting things done. And so they were very, very productive working together. As you were on Social Security and on tax reform, there were other issues like that, but they were very good like that. And I remember very well when Tip turned at his 70th birthday, maybe his 75th, and Reagan decided to give a birthday party for him in the White House. And he did. He invited Tip's friends in for lunch, and he had a whole bunch of people there. And at the end of lunch, Reagan got up to give a toast. And as he often did, he had written out some doggerel that he had liked. And Reagan said, "Tip, if I had a ticket to heaven and you didn't have one too, well, I'd get my ticket back and go to hell with you." So that quality, that spirit, was there. And when Teddy Kennedy died, there was Orrin Hatch singing as, a Republican senator, because he loved Teddy Kennedy, and there was a lot there to love. So I think at the minimum we need to restore a sense of how do we all get along together. That's just for beginning, but it's really important, because if you can't trust the person you're working with, you're not going to give them the benefit of the doubt. And he's going to be, his gain is your loss. This need to be a collaborative game. We're not going to solve this with a knight on the white horse. The great man theory is no longer alive and kicking. What works best today is to have collaboration, constructive collaboration, working with groups, trying to put your best, fitting it together, creating the best team. Very much more important.
Turn to the audience and look for some questions. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if we could just go off the topic of politics and turn to your book about leadership. You led me to believe that, first of all, this is a field guide for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts of the world to decide whether you want to be a leader.
Yeah.
If I got your book right, you got to have guts and look at yourself and be aware of yourself and decide whether you can lead or not.
Yeah.
There are hundreds of young people with passion who can get around all of the gridlock you talked about our governments, both state and federal government. What they lack is capital. The leaders that I see,
they lack what?
They lack capital.
Capital.
They don't have money. You could make a phone call and raise capital because you came out of the leadership mold, the elite schools that train the historical leaders that you bring up in this book.
Yeah.
There's a 17-year-old who cares about the planet Earth. She knew nothing. She didn't go to the Harvard Business School or the Yale School of Management, but she fostered a following from Sweden that went on nationally. Kids who were shot at Parkland School in Florida.
I totally listen.
And they raised some capital, and they're making common sense changes at the state level
I agree.
for gun control. Shouldn't the federal government invest in these social entrepreneurs, these social engineers who are getting around the gridlock in government? That's my question.
It's a fair question, very fair question, and I think it's very consistent with what I was trying to say, or perhaps not well, earlier on, and that is that the younger generation deserves a greater investment, not just of money, but of time and of effort and of trying to help them. Look, I've been at a university now for about 20 years. And one of the most fulfilling things I've done is spend a lot of time raising money for scholarships. And we have now 135 scholarships a year that go through a program I started. We've trained over 1,000 young people through that kind of effort. It took a lot of time, took a lot of effort, but this question is also spotting talent. Seeing somebody, that person's really going to blossom if you give them the opportunity, and trying to and give them some space. Let them, Jack Welch, in his memoir, he wrote about the fact that when he was on his first job, I guess with IBM. Oh, thank you. Hi. Anyway, Jack Welch on his first job, he was working in a factory, blew it up. You know, he made some mistake and blew the damn thing up. And he got a summons to someplace in Connecticut, the headquarters, and he thought he'd be fired. And he walked in, and the guy who his boss said, "Congratulations, you now know what it means to fail, and you've got to deal with failure." And where does judgment come from? It comes from failure, and that's the kind of thing we need to have enough latitude that people can make mistakes. Now, Greta Thunberg in Sweden is a very, very good example of somebody who, out of nowhere, came on the scene, started to picket in Sweden, and she wasn't getting anywhere until she heard about the Parkland kids. And she learned what the Parkland kids did in the States, and she went and emulated that, and she would, every Friday or Thursday, she would stand inside the Parliament building, and she got larger and larger crowds, and then she became a world figure. Look at Malala in Pakistan. She was another person who came out of nowhere. Her father was, they were poor, but she really believed in women's suffrage and women's rights, and she worked like crazy. I got to meet Malala along the way, and she's just one of these people. She's like Mother Teresa. There's a special quality of people like that. But they don't dominate the airway. We're turning Twitter over to a sewage line, and we can do better than that.
It does raise an interesting idea about young people feeling sometimes like leadership is equivalent to privilege, and that that leadership now comes from a different place, like having a voice on social media.
Black Lives Matter is not something that came out of the elites. Black Lives Matter started at the grassroots level by three black women who were just fed up with what was happening in their lives. And you have to give them a lot of credit. I don't agree with all their politics, but I sure as hell give them a lot of credit for trying to bring social change, and which was what we need in this thing. And I think there are other examples like that, like the Black Lives Matter. They're going to come. Now, I have to tell you, I may be wrong, but the more I sort of sniff around, the more I sense that the next generation is not there are too many people in the next generation who are not in good shape. The people who are in pretty darn good shape still are women. Women are trying really, really hard. They're going to college in larger numbers. They're getting jobs. They're coming into the workforce. They're getting into leadership positions. When Nancy Pelosi was elected to Congress, there were 9 women on the Democratic side. Today they're 40. So that was improving. But there's a lot of concern. There's a new book out called Of Boys and Men, written by a fellow named Richard Reeves of Brookings. And it makes the argument that young women are doing better, but young men are doing worse. And they're disanchored. They don't have clear anchors in their lives. They're not quite sure what their purpose in life is. They're experimenting with drugs. They're lonely. A lot of their suicide rates are way up. There are all sorts of things that are happening to young men in this country in greater numbers than are happening. Bad things than are happening to women, and we've got to deal with that and be very, I think, pretty tough-minded about it to get that done. But to give you some sense of how well women have done versus men, they write in this book that in recent times, for every 100 new baccalaureate degrees that have been granted by universities, 74 have gone to women. That's an astonishing number, considering where women have come from. It's a wonderful number in some ways, but where are the guys? And what role are they going to play in this thing? A lot of them are scared on college campuses. They're scared that they do something that's a little bit loose, that's a little bit...
We haven't seen a woman president yet, though. Yeah.
I believe we will. I do, we haven't spent any time really on the situation. But I must say, I go back to Warren Bennett. he used to point out that in the early days of the Republic, we were a nation of 3 million people. And as a group of 3 million, we produced 6 world-class leaders. 6 world-class leaders. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Franklin, Madison, and Hamilton. 6 world-class leaders. Today we have 330 million Americans, and we can't find one. What the hell's going on here? You know, there's something that does not equate. There's something that doesn't add up in all of it.
Let's go back there.
Mr. Gergen, I heard you say this very room that some of the best training for presidential leadership has historically taken place in the large governorship locations around the country.
Yes.
The 2 Roosevelts, Reagan himself from Ohio. And as I look around the current scene of large and even small state governors, I wonder whether that is still true that we're raising a crop of good leaders at the governorship level. Can you name anybody?
Who's good at the governor level? Can name anybody at the governor? I think there are people who make fine governors. There are not as many people who make fine presidents, because these are big, complex jobs, and most people don't have the bandwidth to be able to deal with all the kind of questions that come up. But I do think that I think it's possible to have some promising young leaders, and I mentioned before the mayor of Michigan. I mentioned former mayor of Rhode Island, and you can go through that list. I think the current governor of California is better than he's understood to be in the East Coast. It's Gavin Newsom, and you can now find, I think, people who are strong, and they've learned how to conquer it, and that includes women. And by the way, every Ivy League school right now has a woman president, which is pretty darn impressive in and of itself. So I think it can be done, but I think if we're going to do it, we need to do it in a serious way. And that means, a lot of my friends think I'm too militaristic about this, but I do think the military does a better job of preparing people for jobs and for leadership than almost any other institution. And people who put in 3 or 4 years, pretty tough times. You got to learn how to live with yourself. You got to learn how to, you got to be able to lead up as well as down. But it can be done. It's just what I see coming through the Kennedy School. Usually when there are military folks coming through, military veterans coming through after, getting their undergraduate degree, and they usually get a master's degree, maybe 2 master's degrees, is the ones who come through with military background, military service, tend to do very well. They tend to be good leaders. They tend to be good corporate leaders.
Are you hopeful? When you look at the future now, where we are right now, what's your feeling?
I'm a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. I'm much more encouraged about the future, unless we really screw it up, which we could do. I just don't see. I think the next few months are going to be chaotic. I worry about the safety of the people who are in the process. There are going to be some crazy people out there, and the security problems must be just enormous right now. So I think that they have a acronym at West Point about what life is like for the young cadets who are going to go out into the world, what they should expect, and it's called VUCA, V-U-C-A. And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. Ambiguity. Nice, thank you. Are you military? You're military. Here's the microphone. Tell us what we want. Are you seriously West Point?
Yes, sir.
Good for you. Where are you now?
Well, I live in Yarmouthport.
You live where?
Yarmouthport.
Yarmouthport. But you're not in the military now?
No, sir.
Good. What are you doing for a job?
I work in infrastructure.
Do you really? Doing what?
But I will say my son is a Naval Academy graduate.
We won't hold that against him.
So Army, Navy.
Army versus Navy, are they playing against each other in one of the, no, seriously.
I always say one of us is happy at the end of that game.
Well, when did you graduate from?
40 years ago.
4 years ago?
40
40 years ago?
40 years ago.
You should stick with their infrastructure. That's great. Good for you. Thank you. Is there anything you disagree with or agree with strongly here?
Oh, no, sir. I do agree that the military inspires esprit de corps, values, service to country, all the things that one looks for in a leader.
Yeah.
Men and women.
Yeah, I agree. Good. Thank you.
We just have a few minutes left because I
Sure.
know we need to get you out the door on time. We'll go back to the center here in the rear.
Yes, I'm just curious, you talked about the change of regard and the younger generation of leaders, but I look at, for example, the Republican Party, and a lot of people like Roy Blunt and Senator Burr, now Mitt Romney, Bob Corker, they all gave way to the new guard, and they've been replaced by people like J.D. Vance and Josh Hawley. And I don't think, personally, I don't agree with any of them politically, but I'd rather have Roy Blunt than Josh Hawley, for example. And certainly, Bob Corker over J.D. Vance. So I don't think that the next generation is necessarily, I'd rather have the old guys, let's put it that way. And I look at the Republican Party in the House, and it's a mess led by people like Lauren Boebert and her little escapades, and Matt Gertz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, and the new generation, at least in the Republican Party, and to some extent in the Democratic Party, but especially in the Republican Party, is not, it doesn't inspire confidence, and I'm not racing to have more of them come in.
Listen, I agree with that, and people say, well, these elite colleges will solve all the problems. That's not true. Look at DeSantis. DeSantis is Yale, Harvard Law. And there are several like that. Ted Cruz is like that. There are a number of people like that. So, look, I don't think there's any one rule that fits. What I would say is that a lot of the energy and a lot of the demand for change is coming from the younger generation. And we're seeing that particularly on the environment. There's sharp disagreement with the old hands who won't get out of the way and, are working for the fossil fuel industry in one way or another. And we just simply can't seem to get beyond that. So, I think there will be some good people who I see the Mitt Romneys of the world. I'm going to see we're losing the moderates. And that's what's making this really difficult. So I think intergenerational change is coming. I think that for better, for worse, and I hope for better. I think it's going to be. I think we're going to be in a better position 15 years from now, 10 years from now than we are today. That we won't feel like we're riding along the side of a cliff with the lights off. Which is the way a lot of people feel about our life in Washington today. But, part of this, it's often true that the nations get the leadership they deserve. So if you've got a leader, if you've got a followership, very authoritarian, you're going to tend to wind up with an authoritarian leader. You put whatever name you want on it. But the truth is, sometimes we're putting in place people who have more money rather than more education.
We're at 8 o'clock, and I've been told that you have a sharp out. I don't know. Okay.
Just to your last comment about money, I mean, how do we change the politics if power is money and the young people don't have it? How do we get the money out of politics?
You're right. I probably should have stopped.
I was going to say now. Now we begin the second hour of our program.
I'm not sure. I think that we're not clear about that yet. I do think that often people who have money are sort of, their power goes to their head and they're thrown out. And I think we're going to see some more of that in the years ahead. Some of these jokers coming through. We need to get them the heck out of there. So listen, once again, I really want to thank you for coming out tonight in this rain. You were really kind to do that. And I would like to, I'm so glad to have a chance to participate in this program, the speaker series. It just seems to me you're doing something great for the community. So, we're all appreciative of that. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thanks.
Let me see if I can disentangle you before you walk off here.
Meeting room. Dessert to the meeting room.
Myself